What is Upstate United?
Upstate United is a not-for-profit advocacy organization that really promotes lower taxes and pro-growth policies coming out of Albany.
And recently, you've sent out some information about, let me get this up, about the 2023 advocacy agenda highlighting New York State's population problems and lagging economic recovery. I guess my first question would be, what is your immediate reaction to the latest census data that was released last week?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's what we've been saying for years, is that the policies coming out of Albany have been negatively impacting upstate for the 17 years of which Upstate United has been advocating. It's really not a surprise that we've continued to see bad numbers. I think what is surprising is that over the past 2 years, we've finally not just seen a loss in upstate population, but we've seen an overall loss in New York State. We are down 500,000 people, and that's significant. As the governor said, that's an alarm bell that can't be ignored. And she said that a year ago, and now we're at 500,000 loss in terms of our population.
So what's your reaction to that?
Yeah, it's alarming, and I think it necessitates immediate action in Albany to try to turn things around. Listen, we didn't get here overnight. I mean, we went from, right, at one point having 45 members in the House of Representatives. We are down to 26. We have been on a long, slow decline. Some of that is directly related to the policies coming out of Albany that make it very difficult for New York State employers and employees to stay here.
It's expensive.
Yeah, and it is expensive, and that has profound impacts for our budget, right? New York State depends on that personal income tax that comes out of New York City. As you probably are well aware, 1% of the taxpayers pay 40% of personal income taxes in New York City, and the Comptroller DiNapoli has raised alarms over this as well, and indicated this really isn't sustainable.
And so moving along, what are the most important components, do you think, of the 2023 advocacy agenda?
Yeah, I think it's really important, first of all, that our leaders in Albany actually come to grips with the fact that this is occurring, right? Like that we are actually losing people in New York State. They're voting with their feet, and they're leaving, and they're going to other states. I think that has to be acknowledged. And I'm pleased that the Governor Hochul has actually acknowledged this. I mean, I think that's the very first step, is acknowledging the problem. I think what's more difficult is to change the culture in Albany, which is used to and addicted to programs that are incredibly expensive, and we act as if we still have 45 members in the House, as if we are still a state that can afford to be one of the highest tax states in the nation. And unfortunately, we can't. It has led to a decline in population. It's led to a decline in businesses. It's led to a decline in employment. All those factors are a result of the policies that are coming out of Albany. Whether it's municipalities that are facing increased mandates, which they have to pass those costs along to employers and to the employees, the taxpayers, or whether it's them passing along mandates to those very same businesses, right? In a lot of ways, they're getting hit doubly, right? Because the municipalities are facing increased mandates and they're passing along those costs. And then those employers are being hit with increased mandates, and they're having to pass along those costs. And those ultimately all go to the consumer and the taxpayer at the end of the day.
Oh no, you're fine. And so in its simplest form, why are people leaving New York, do you think?
I think what it is, quite frankly, is an attitude in Albany that they can continue to tax and spend as if there are no as if math doesn't apply here, as if physics is somehow suspended. People cannot continue to pay, and frankly, it's not wise, right? If you are a business that's in competition, for example, with other businesses from other states, there is a point at which financially it is in your interest to go to another state, so that you can be competitive, so that you can continue to operate that business. In fact, what I would say is New York State continues to offer incentives for people to leave, and by being one of the highest taxed states in the country without acknowledging the impacts. I'll give you a great example. The farm labor overtime threshold. Well, while it was incredibly well intentioned, the fact is that the lawmakers, right, that sponsor this bill were from Queens, New York. I'm not really sure how much and how familiar they are with the agricultural industry, how much experience they have with it, how much time they've spent in upstate New York, and how important that sector is to our economy. But the changes that they made not only put New York at a competitive disadvantage with neighboring states, it puts us at a competitive disadvantage globally. The additional setback too is going to be to those farm workers, the farm workers who wanted to stay in New York, but who now are going to be limited in the amount of hours they can actually work, because study after study showed, particularly the Cornell study, showed that what was going to likely happen is that farms that continued to exist in New York were to be those that invested in technology. And the other likely impact would be that the farm workers would go to those states and where they could continue to work as many hours as they wanted. So unfortunately, that is an example of the type of policy coming out of Albany that is well-intentioned, but reflects a lack of understanding of how the economy works in upstate New York and how different it is from the economy of New York City.
So what do you think can be done to make upstate more affordable for everyday New Yorkers?
Yeah, and look, and in this sense, we're going to sound a little bit like a broken record, because we've continued over the years to say, look, we need to reduce the mandates, we need to reduce taxes. But I tell you what, I'm somewhat encouraged by the fact that we have a governor now that's from upstate New York. We have for years blamed the policies coming out of Albany on the fact that we had governors and leaders in Albany that really didn't understand the dynamics of the upstate economy. There is no doubt that Governor Hochul, born in upstate New York, lived in upstate New York all of her life, worked in local government. Governor Hochul understands the challenges we face, which again is the first step, right? Understanding the challenges we face. And so I'm incredibly encouraged that we have a governor in office that understands those challenges. I think for the governor, the difficulty is going to be trying to find a way to work with the legislature to ensure that the policies coming out of Albany don't disproportionately impact upstate New York in a negative way, right? I mean, we have bill after bill that exempts cities over 1 million from particular policies. I think it's time that we take a look at exempting upstate New York from some of the policies that are coming out of Albany.
And what do you think can be done, for tax relief?
Yeah, look, one of the things we could certainly do, and we ought to do, is take a look at the policies coming out of Albany. I'll give you another real world concrete example. We have unemployment insurance in New York State rates that are incredibly high. They're at the highest rates possible. Employers are paying an additional $200 per employee more than they were pre-pandemic. That is having a devastating impact on small businesses. In addition to that $200 in the highest rates that they're paying additional surcharges because of the amount of money we borrowed from the federal government. Add on top of that, this is insult to injury, right? Those employers are paying for $11 billion that the Department of Labor let slip through the cracks. I hope we can edit that.
Oh, we can.
Okay.
No problem.
In addition, the New York State Department of Labor let $11 billion in fraudulent payments slip through the cracks. That money, that $11 billion, New York State employers are on the hook to pay for that, even though it was the Department of Labor that improperly made those payments. So because of the fact that they did not update their technology systems, right? Even though despite the fact that they've been warned in 2010, 2015 to update those systems, New York employers are on the hook for that now. And again, those costs are going to be passed along to consumers. So there's a lot of things we could do to ease the burden on employers and on consumers and on taxpayers and on municipalities in upstate New York. But there really has to be the acknowledgement that this is a problem. And frankly, we haven't even seen that acknowledgement when it comes to the $11 billion in fraudulent payments that were made by the Department of Labor. What we see is a lot of excuses made, but not a lot of action being taken in Albany to ensure that businesses don't have to pay that cost.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. So moving along, what about energy reliability?
Yeah, again, this is a great example of, again, really well-intentioned legislation, right? We see the CLCPA being passed in New York State, which makes us a leader in renewables and clean energy. The problem is, while well-intentioned, that legislation is going to place an incredible burden on upstate businesses that rely on natural gas. There are a number of industries that are incredibly reliant on natural gas to produce their products. Any changes in costs could cause those businesses to relocate. And frankly, even the scoping plan that was put out by the Climate Action Council acknowledges that a number of businesses are likely to leave New York if we don't somehow figure out how to offer them incentives to stay. So I, again, appreciate the acknowledgement that there are problems with our policies in this area. But again, unfortunately, we don't have any concrete solutions. We just have proposals that are going to increase costs, that are going to make energy less reliable and less affordable in upstate New York. And unfortunately, while acknowledging that there may be some serious problems with that, we don't have any solutions being put forth. So it's incredibly problematic that we have policies, again, going full speed ahead, while at the same time not addressing the very real world consequences with reliability and cost. And we're not the only ones that have made that point. I mean, frankly, the New York State independent system operator, those folks who are in charge of the reliability of the grid, have acknowledged that we're going to have real potential problems here if we don't, do the transition in a more thoughtful manner. They're not looking at the economics of it. They're looking at the reliability. And what we're saying is there's a problem with both.
Right. And moving on to kind of like my final, one of my final things that I wanted to ask you about, and how, you could think about proposing addressing, is investment in infrastructure.
Yeah, look, it's incredibly important that we continue. And listen, there's record amount of money that's been given and granted from the feds in this regard. It's really important that investment be made in upstate New York, not just the MTA. We need those funds invested in our roads and bridges in upstate New York. Remember how reliant we are on transportation, trucking, for all of our needs in upstate New York. We commute miles and miles to work in upstate New York. We don't have the type of public transportation infrastructure that they have in New York City. So it's really critical that our roads and bridges get the kind of investments that we need. Too many of them are really just in a state of complete disrepair. So again, if we want to maintain commerce. We want to reduce the costs of maintaining vehicles, which again, unfortunately, a very real cost for residents in upstate New York, and it's not going to come as a shock to anyone that lives in an upstate New York community, is having to get a car tire fixed because you hit a pothole. We need our roads to be maintained. It's very critical that our roads and bridges are fixed and maintained. And listen, investment in broadband is included in that infrastructure. We need to make sure we're investing in broadband for all of our communities across upstate New York. We know from our experience with the pandemic that a lot of folks didn't have access to the tools that they needed to learn from home and work from home, which is just vitally critical to our communities across upstate New York.
Yeah, Justin, you did a great job. Is there anything else that you want to add? Anything I should have asked you that I didn't?
Oh, that's a great question. I love when I love when reporters ask that. No, I think you did a great job. Look, I think I want to just put a positive sort of spin on some of this, right? I've been pretty negative, but I think it's really important to note that, look, while we have been, in a relative decline for a very long time in New York State, we still maintain some of the best institutions. We have some of the most talented employees in New York. We have an incredibly industrious group of folks here in upstate New York. Again, we have the talent. We have the right folks here. We just need to make sure that the policies coming in out of Albany aren't holding folks back. And, I think if we acknowledge the problem that we have in terms of the effects of these policies on upstate growth, that's the first step. And once we do that, I think we can start to look at pro-growth policies that'll help really ignite the innovative capacity of the people in upstate New York.